For most of history, the mind wasn't really something you studied. It was just there. It was this total black box, right? A mystery that science, for the most part, wanted nothing to do with. But then one guy comes along and asks this really uncomfortable question. A question that was going to change everything.
I mean, what if our inner world, all that chaos, all that confusion, actually followed rules? What if it had patterns, just like the rest of nature? That was the wild idea that William James put on the table, and let me tell you, it flew in the face of centuries of accepted wisdom. It would completely change how we see ourselves.
See, you gotta understand, back in the 19th century, the world of ideas was carved up pretty neatly. You want to talk about abstract thoughts, logic, the nature of consciousness? Great, go talk to a philosopher. That was their turf.
And what about our feelings? Our passions, our deepest emotions. Well, those were matters for the church, for religion, for spirituality. That was stuff for the soul, not for a scientist in a lab coat.
So you had science, which was just crushing it, right? Figuring out the laws of motion, chemistry, electricity, conquering the physical world. But the human mind? Nah. Too subjective, too messy. Frankly, it was just too human to study.
Okay, so the stage is set. The scientific community has basically put up a giant keep out sign around our inner lives. It's unmeasurable, so it's unknowable. End of story. But the guy who's about to tear that whole wall down, he wasn't driven by some grand ambition. He was driven by pure desperation.
And that brings us to our main character, William James. Now, his journey into the mind, it didn't start in some sterile laboratory. Oh no, it started in a place of really deep personal suffering. For James, this wasn't some fun academic puzzle to solve. This was about survival.
So James was just plagued by this crippling depression and overwhelming anxiety. Back then, they had this kind of vague catch-all term for it, neurasthenia. It got so bad that he actually thought about suicide for months on end. It was a period he later called his soul sickness. So you see, for him, the mind wasn't some abstract thing to theorize about. It was a dangerous, very personal battleground.
And here's a fascinating little detail. James actually got a medical degree from Harvard, but he never practiced medicine a day in his life. He famously said he just sort of drifted into psychology and philosophy from a sort of fatality. It makes sense, right? His own mind was the one great mystery he absolutely had to solve.
So this awful personal crisis, it actually becomes his big turning point. He starts to form this totally revolutionary idea. What if subjective experience, the very thing science was running away from, what if that could be the subject of scientific study?
And this right here shows you just how big a shift in thinking he was proposing. Before James, people kind of thought of the mind as a box, right? A container that held a bunch of separate ideas. But James came along and said, no, the mind isn't a thing at all. It's a process, it's a flow.
And he gave us this absolutely brilliant metaphor for it, the stream of consciousness. Think about it. Our minds are never still, are they? One thought just melts into the next. Memories from years ago suddenly pop up and color what we're seeing right now. Our emotions are always messing with our logic. It's not a collection of things, it's this dynamic, living, flowing system.
So all these ideas, they all came together in his monumental work, a book that would literally become the foundation for a brand new science.
And when I say monumental, I mean it. We're talking 1,200 pages, 2 massive volumes that took him 12 years to write. It was finally published in 1890, and it was dense, it was daring, and it was completely unlike anything anyone had ever read before. So the big question is, how do you measure something that's unmeasurable, like a stream? Well, James's genius was that he did it by giving it structure. He basically created a scientific language for talking about the mind. He started defining and breaking down its core parts, things like attention, habit, instinct, emotion, the will, and he did all this without once having to talk about some mystical, unknowable soul.
Now, you might think everyone just applauded this breakthrough, but nope, far from it. He got resistance from all sides. The philosophers, they accused him of being way too simplistic, of butchering the beautiful complexity of it all. And the scientists, they basically said he was being too vague, too much like a philosopher. He was a man completely caught between two worlds. But you know what? That's exactly why his legacy is so powerful. James never claimed to have all the answers. What he did was so much more important. He built the framework that made it possible for other people to even start asking the right questions.
And you can see that legacy right here on this timeline. His book comes out in 1890, and boom, soon after, psychology starts to emerge as a real scientific discipline. Then, decades later, in the mid-20th century, cognitive psychology comes along and revives his ideas about things like habit and attention. And today, modern neuroscience is actually validating a lot of his core insights using fMRIs and all sorts of amazing brain imaging tech.
I think this quote just sums it up perfectly. He didn't solve the mind. He did something way more important. He made it legitimate to study. See, William James didn't build the machines we use to scan the brain. He built the intellectual permission slip. He gave science the green light to finally go explore our inner world.
By treating our own human experience as something that could follow laws, something that wasn't just mystical and beyond our grasp, he kicked open a door that science had kept bolted shut for centuries. And thanks to William James, the mind finally walked into the laboratory. And you know what? It never left.